Welcome to Film and Page. I'm Dominic, and in this video I want to talk about gatekeeping. And this is a word that I see used a lot online still in the last, 6-7 years. It's been used like to death. And in particular what I'm talking about is gatekeeping a fandom. So in this video I want to talk about why it's wrong to do that, why it's wrong to gatekeep a fandom, and why you can't gatekeep a fandom anyway. And it's useless to even try. And people are trying, but it's something you cannot do. I don't think you can do it. I might be wrong, but in my opinion, you can't do it. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. So I'm going to give two examples of this, because these are two fandoms that I run in. One is comic books and the other is Star Trek. So I'm going to start with Star Trek first, because Star Trek is a very interesting fandom. I'm not like I run in a few different fandom circles. So it's interesting to see the difference in what kind of people a certain thing attracts and how the differences are. So I find like horror fans are very different from Star Trek fans. Because Star Trek is a very interesting thing. It's similar to Star Wars, but I think Star Trek is more so than Star Wars. It's more almost like a pseudo-religion. Because Gene Roddenberry had this vision, and he had this message that he wanted to put in Star Trek. And so Star Trek almost has like a set of values to it. That people who are hardcore fans, they almost kind of follow those values. And they think if you're a Star Trek fan and you're a Trekkie, and you're into Star Trek, that you should follow those values as well. And if you disagree with any of those values, then you're not really a Star Trek fan. You shouldn't be part of the community. Now, not all Star Trek fans think like that. There's a very broad range of different kinds of fans out there. There's hardcore fans, and then there's casual fans. And then there's everything in between. But I've seen this a lot with Star Trek fans. So even some of the actors in Star Trek has even come out on Twitter and, come out and said that, if certain people didn't have these type of values that I have, then they shouldn't even watch Star Trek, and Star Trek's not for them. Which, for me, I always thought that was very odd for Star Trek fans to do. Because if you already agree with all the messages in Star Trek, then and you think that anyone who doesn't have those, that you perceive doesn't have those same values or doesn't agree with those values, shouldn't be watching the show at all and has no place in the fandom, well then that message, in my opinion, is not going anywhere. The message you want to spread. It's just bouncing around in an echo chamber. You're preaching to the choir, as the old saying goes. Where if you see all these people who don't have the same values and you disagree with them, they should be the ones you should be encouraging them to watch Star Trek, because they're the ones that need the message. You're already converted. They're not. So from that aspect, I never really understood that logic. But on top of that, it doesn't matter, because you can't stop someone. The most horrendous person in the world, no matter what kind of value system they are, if they're at home, they can turn on Netflix anytime they want and watch an episode of Star Trek. And I see the same thing going on in comic books. Where certain people saying, well, we gotta gatekeep comics to keep these people out of it, these people who want to change their characters and do this and do that. But it's something that just can't be done, because again, you can't stop who buys comic books. You just can't. Not even the companies who own these IPs can control who the fans are. And as far as these companies care, I don't really think they care who the fans are. They just want everyone to buy the merchandise, and they want to make money off these things. That's all they care about. So it's an interesting thing that I see happening. Now, you might be able to gatekeep an industry. That's a little bit different, because you can get the right people who have the right ideological bent in certain positions, so they can stop certain people from being hired and all that if they don't agree with those people. So that's a little bit different. And then you might be able to gatekeep like smaller communities inside of the fandom. So let's say if you have a specific Star Trek fan page on Facebook, and you put in there as a disclaimer, we only want these specific types of Star Trek fans. Now that you can gatekeep, because now you can put in moderators and all that and watch and make sure the right people get in to talk in there. So that kind of stuff. But the fandom overall, you can't do it. And it's, when people say it, I just feel like it's something you're never going to accomplish. You're just going to be like a car stuck in the mud, spinning its wheels forever. You're never going to get anywhere with that. And it's just not a good thing to want anyway. Because what would happen if these people got their ways with this wish, if they got rid of all the people they didn't like out of the fandom, then it would just create a new split. That fandom would just turn on itself. That's how I always see that with groups. And this is something I've talked about on my channel before. This is something I've actually seen with Comicsgate and anti-Comicsgate, because I watched the battle go out on Twitter over the years between these two groups. And around like 2017, 2018, that was probably the most fever pitch the battle went on between these two groups. And it was just non-stop on Twitter all the time, fighting. And, you know, arguing and blocking and doxing each other. Every dirty trick in the book. And both sides were doing it. Both sides were just as guilty. But then there was like a brief cooling period where for some reason, the two groups just stopped fighting. And they just basically blocked each other into oblivion. So then they just didn't fight anymore. So they kind of went back to their own corners of the internet. And then, but you could still kind of peek in on both groups and see what was happening. But what was interesting is when they stopped fighting with each other, then these groups started to implode on themselves. The anti-Comicsgaters, they started to fight among themselves over all kinds of crap. And then same thing with the Comic-Gators. They started to form their own little factions, and that group started to fight amongst themselves. So both of those groups, you could probably put them in one major group and call it just Dramagate. So that's what would happen if you did get your wish, and all the people you didn't like, you got them out of that fandom, and you just wake up one morning, and I don't want all these types of people, I don't want them to be fans of this anymore, and you could just cast a magic spell and they were gone, and you got your wish, then whatever's left, they would turn on each other eventually. That's how it always is. That's just how people are for some reason. And so that's why it would never work. Even if you got your way, you would never reach that point where you would have like this perfect fandom that just was this perfect community and just, you know, and just went in this harmony together, and it was all rainbows and puppy dogs and kittens and all that. It would just never work. And the other thing is, a lot of these fandoms like Star Wars and Star Trek, like they seem really divided today. And people say, well, it wasn't like that, or it was different back in the day. And I mean, that is kind of true, but the one thing that isn't true is, again, I'm going to use Star Trek for an example, is Star Trek was always a split fandom. It always was. Because I can remember back in the day, like, okay, I'll tell you this story as an example. I first got on the internet for real in 2001. That's when I got my very first computer. I was working, saved up my money, and went out and bought my first desktop. And got internet, got online for the first time in 2001. Now, before that, if I wanted to look up anything online, I had to walk to the library or go to a friend's place that had the internet. It wasn't a common thing like it is now. And the internet was a very different place than what it is now. So one of the first things I found was Star Trek official website. Being a Star Trek fan, I went and gravitated to stuff like that right away. And I saw that they had a Star Trek fandom forum on their website, so I joined it. And around this time was when Star Trek Enterprise was starting up. And I remember being so excited for Star Trek Enterprise. Couldn't wait for the show. It was going to be a prequel, and I was just imagining in my head what it was all going to look like, and I couldn't wait to see it. And then it came out, and I was very disappointed with the first episode. Right off the bat, I had two complaints right off the bat. One, I couldn't stand the theme song, that pop song. It just didn't suit the Star Trek. It just wasn't like didn't suit a Star Trek show. I figured that it was Enterprise. They were going to have the classic Star Trek theme in there, like they did for the original series in TNG, and that wasn't in there. And then the other thing, I didn't really care for the design of the Enterprise itself. It almost looked a little too ahead of its time, almost too advanced, like it belonged like more in the motion picture era or something like that. But I thought it should have always looked more like a Daedalus class starship. So I went into the forums and basically gave my thoughts. This is what I think of the show. And in those forums, it was basically a knockdown, drag-out fight. It was a war between a group of fans who were defending Star Trek Enterprise, a group of fans who was criticizing, and it got pretty nasty. And it got pretty, as you would say, toxic in there. So again, fan base was very split, even back then. And it reminds me a lot of today. Like, I find today you kind of got two groups of Star Trek fans. I find there is one set of Star Trek fans who love everything Star Trek. It doesn't matter what the quality of the show is like. They could churn out, no matter whatever they churn out, if it's got Star Trek on it, these group of fans will love it and they'll watch it. It's like they don't question it. And it was the same thing back then. You had a group of fans who just loved everything that was put out that had Star Trek on it, and they were just, you know, defending it right to the death. Now there are some legitimate fans out there who actually do like Star Trek Enterprise, and Star Trek Enterprise has grown on me a little bit over the years, although I still have the same criticisms of it. So it was never this harmonious thing. Now the only difference, the big difference is nowadays, if you don't like Star Trek, it's almost like people will call you like there's a political divide in there now that wasn't there back then. Like you weren't called a conservative back in the day if you didn't like Star Trek Enterprise. So that part of it is new. Then that didn't go on. You weren't called like a conservative, or you know, there's other names out there I don't want to say that they call people, or a bigot or something like that. If you didn't like Enterprise, you weren't called those names like you are called now. If you don't like Discovery and a lot of the newer shows, but you were still called names. I was called some colorful names in the forums back in the day for criticizing Star Trek Enterprise. They were just different kind of names, but I was called names. So this whole idea that you could gatekeep it or you can keep it out, keep this fandom, people out of certain fandoms, it's impossible to do. It can't be done, and it shouldn't be done anyway. Because no one can stop you from liking something, or buying the merchandise, or watching the show, or reading the book. No one can stop you from being a part of that fandom. They just can't. It just cannot be done. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one. I'd like to say thank you to all of my subscribers. I appreciate you all in helping this channel grow. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded.